I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The government sensationally backtracked on its pledge to scrap all EU legislation from the UK statute book by the end of 2023, despite Rishi Sunak's summer leadership campaign vowing to review or revoke over 2,000 European laws in his first 100 days as Prime Minister. Well, on day 198, Mr. Sunak's administration has pivoted faster than a spinning top and will in fact retain most of the laws imposed on us by Brussels. I'll give you my views on this screeching Jeremy Clarkson-esque handbrake turn. Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, caused a stir today by delivering a marked critique of the government's illegal migration bill in the House of Lords. The intervention comes just days after he himself anointed our sovereign inside Westminster Abbey. I will be discussing the relationship between church and state with an Anglican clergyman who knows all about it. The popular, well-known building society Skipton has notably announced the return of 100% mortgages for first-time buyers. Will this move solve the relentless problem of getting young people on the housing ladder, or is it a perilous move following the disastrous 2008 financial crisis? I have just the man to discuss this topic with me in the studio. And investment bank Goldman Sachs delivered a stark warning that gas bills could treble by the end of this year. And with the crypto-socialist energy bill successfully passing its second reading in the House of Commons yesterday, what is the solution to these frequently rising and even more frequently unpredictable energy costs? State of the Nation starts now. Well, also be joined by a particularly esteemed panel this evening, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the entrepreneur and environmental campaigner, Rachel Watkin. As ever, I want to hear from you. A lot of you have been getting in touch already, actually, because it's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.uk. But now it's time for a swift refresh of the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. Our top story tonight, a former Conservative cabinet minister has criticised the Prime Minister over scrapping plans to remove thousands of European Union laws. Jacob Rees-Mogg accused Rishi Sunak of shredding his own promises after he appeared to U-turn on a pledge to eliminate them all by the end of the year. Earlier, the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, said only around 600 out of 4,800 laws would now be revoked under the retained EU law bill. That's due, she says, to risks of legal uncertainty if they were automatically scrapped. And in other news today, the Archbishop of Canterbury condemned the government's illegal migration bill in a rare intervention from the House of Lords. The controversial legislation aims to detain and promptly remove migrants who arrive in the UK via small boats. It also looks to limit the ability of the European Court of Human Rights to prevent the deportation of asylum seekers. Downing Street said the bill is compassionate and fair, but Justin Welby said it treats migrants as invaders.
It is a siloed bill, not a whole-of-government bill. It does not draw in conflict management and prevention, which drives migration. It does not draw in climate impacts, which drive migration and conflict. It is isolationist. It is morally unacceptable and politically impractical.
Interest rates are expected to rise again this week as inflation remains high, according to economists. Experts believe the base rate will rise by 0.25% to 4.5%. And that would be the 12th consecutive raise by the central bank and mark the highest level since 2008. Any rise will make loans and mortgage rates more expensive. Now, members of the Public and Commercial Services Union have voted today to renew their mandate to keep taking industrial action at least for the next 6 months. The decision came as other civil servants belonging to the Prospect Union began a new walkout in their long-running dispute over pay, jobs and redundancy terms. That follows the government's 4.5% pay rise offer, which the union said would further erode living standards. And the publisher of the Mirror newspaper unreservedly apologised to the Duke of Sussex today for unlawful information gathering. At the start of a High Court trial over alleged phone hacking, Mirror Group newspapers admitted that Prince Harry's legal challenge warranted compensation. The tabloid also promised the behaviour would never be repeated. Other high-profile claimants involved in the trial include former Girls Aloud singer Cheryl, the estate of George Michael and the footballer Ian Wright. And in the United States, Republican Congressman George Santos has pleaded not guilty to 13 charges, including fraud and money laundering. The 34-year-old has been arrested after the Justice Department accused him of using campaign funds to purchase designer clothes and pay off personal debt. Mr. Santos also allegedly applied for unemployment money while being employed and running for Congress. We'll keep an eye on that case for you throughout the rest of the evening. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Prime Minister gave his word. He said in his leadership campaign that he would put EU laws through the shredder. Let's have a look at what he actually said, because it's worth reviewing and understanding. stirring music, patriotic overtones, Brussels, red tape, masses of rules and regulations going through the shredder. What a fantastic image, one to warm the cockles of the heart of the most cynical Brexiteer. But in spite of a big majority in the House of Commons, not a single Conservative MP voting against either at second reading or at third reading. A majority, nearly 60 at third reading. It went off to the House of Lords, and there the problem started. Because the House of Lords, the undemocratic House of Lords, with no elections except for hereditary peers taking place there, has never liked it. But of course it hasn't, because so many of the peers are Remainers and always were, and have voted against Brexit at every opportunity and at every turn. They wanted to frustrate the removal of retained EU law. Why? Because it makes us diverge from the European Union. It puts in stone the departure that we voted for in Brexit in 2016. So the Remainiac House of Lords determined to block this and had put down hundreds of amendments that would have been debated next week at the report stage. So the government's done a screeching U-turn. The democratic will of the British people, as expressed at a referendum, as expressed in the election in 2019, as expressed through their representatives in the House of Commons, has been overturned to appease ermine-clad Remainers in the House of Lords, in spite of a prime ministerial promise. But it's not just about delivering on promises, delivering on manifesto commitments. It's also a real opportunity in an inflationary era, because one of the things you can do when inflation is running away is make the economy more efficient. And how do you do that? You do that by deregulating. You bring down the costs of doing business. Those costs are imposed through the thousands of EU regulations that are now going to stay. What was the position a week ago was that by default EU regulation would be repealed. Now the government has said that nearly 90% of EU regulation will in fact stay. So this golden opportunity to deregulate, help defeat the dragon of inflation that may find that the hose of higher interest rates is being plied upon it tomorrow, that particular route has been taken away from the government, from the British people. But it's also about trust. One of Rishi Sunak's great strengths when he came in was that he is trustworthy, that people think that his word is his bond. We had lots of arguments about Boris Johnson and his relationship with truth. Now, in my personal experience, I always found Boris Johnson to be a truthful man, but there certainly were questions raised about it. Now, what about Mr. Sunak? He said one thing, and he's doing another. His words and his deeds are not matching. That is a dangerous position for a Prime Minister to be in. The 2019 manifesto that people like me got elected on is not being followed. Brexit, that was meant to be safeguarded by this, is now being blocked by Remainers in the House of Lords, and weakness coming from ministries. This seems to me to be a real blow to Brexit, a problem for Brexit, not delivering on what we want and not giving us the fruits of deregulation that we voted for. However, I want to hear your views, but I also want to discuss this with my panel, because I've got with me Kelvin Mackenzie and Rachel Watkin to discuss this. Rachel, you may not agree with me entirely.
No, I do agree with you.
Oh, you're here to disagree with me. It's Kelvin who's meant to agree.
No, I agree, because it's like the government's gone into headless chicken mode. Yet again, we have got a government that is going back on what they've promised. You know, Trump, love him or hate him, you knew where you stood with him. And if he said that he was going to do something, he followed it through, on the whole. But we're back now to a situation where we can't trust the government, and what's worse for industry, businesses like mine, is when are we going to find out which rules are being kept and which ones aren't, and where does that leave us? Because there's all sorts of laws on maternity, on workers' rights, on product legislation. When are we going to know?
That's such a good point, because one of the things I was arguing when we were bringing this forward was that we needed to have this done and dusted by the election so that people knew. Yes. Otherwise, the election, the Labour Party will say all sorts of scare stories about you're getting rid of workers' rights, which is not the intention of the government and never was.
No. When Brexit was first announced, the notice period that industry was given, you know, companies like ours, was so slim that trading in Europe for the first few months was utter hell. And we're going to be back in that same situation where no one is going to know what the rules are if we've got the sort of hybrid of some laws we're keeping, some we aren't.
Kelvin, isn't this John Major-esque?
I think what it does is reinforce the view that this is a Brexit we didn't sign up for. I feel that we are in the worst of all worlds right now. We voted for something it's not being delivered. We've been unlucky with Ukraine, unlucky with COVID and all the rest of it. But we don't have a firm view of what this nation is. And that, I think, is very dangerous for the survival of this Tory administration. And what I can't understand is the why of it. What is the point of saying you're going to do something? I think most people would have said, do you know what? Some of this legislation is way beyond my pay grade. I don't understand 90% of it. But it looks like a good thing. It looks as though we're getting something we voted for. Now they say, well, there seems to be some downsides to having voted Brexit, certainly in terms of productivity, if you believe the stats. But where is this upside of slashing legislation? It's not there.
And it's very rare that politicians give a specific, identifiable promise and then break it. Very often events overtake and things don't get introduced, but it's quite rare that something that's been introduced was a promise is then reversed.
Yes, I honestly think that this is another cloud hanging over this administration, which they didn't need. Now, they're probably, if there were a government minister sitting there now, he would probably say, look, this is a massive event. We can't just go like that. In that case, why did they say it, since it would have been obvious at the start that this was a big issue? And so I really don't understand what's happening to the Tory administration.
I think it also makes us a laughing stock of Europe, because in Rishi's statements originally, he said that by getting rid of the legislation would give us a chance to become true leaders in industry. And now we're going back on what he said at that point.
But can I ask you something? I mean, you are, you know, a Brexiteer in your soul on this issue. Can I honestly ask you, would you still vote for Brexit, having seen what has now happened and the fact that the government are now bailing out with a whole series of things, and there seems to be no impetus within this administration, and we certainly know the next one, would you still have voted for it?
Unquestionably, because my reason for voting for Brexit was always about democracy. And the thing about democracy is you're entitled to vote for governments who do things that you want, but other people are entitled to vote for governments who do things you don't want. And that was fundamental to my support for Brexit. I thought it was a huge opportunity for people of my views who want deregulation and so on.
So what happens now to all, as you pointed out, to all the Tory MPs who voted to a man and a woman that this was to happen, and now they get told, I'm sorry, folks, we don't quite understand what we're going to do?
Well, I mean, I think the interesting thing, actually, is, Kelvin, that you raised on Whitehall not being able to do the work. Now, is this good enough that in businesses set out a plan, they work to it, and they make things happen? That's what leadership in business is about, isn't it?
Can I be really controversial and say, well, the strikes probably aren't helping?
Yeah, that's true.
If the civil service is striking, they won't be able to do the work. But it's not an excuse. They knew the work that was involved. So to raise that as an excuse now doesn't make sense.
And the job of ministers is to provide leadership to departments to get things done. It's always difficult to get things done.
And whether you are pro-Brexit or anti-Brexit, the fact is we are here. So we just need a clean cut, move on, and then everybody knows where they stand.
But is that going to happen anyway? Isn't one of the points about this? They now want to go through it line by line. Won't this all get kicked into the long grass anyway? I mean, is there really any possibility before the next election that this lot will all be dumped?
Well, I think the problem is that the legislation will be less clear because they're going to have a facility to review some of these laws over an indefinite period, which is exactly what the House of Lords doesn't like anyway. Also think it empowers the House of Lords to be difficult over other things as well, because the House of Lords had a big victory. Having won this and having had the Archbishop speak out against the immigration bill, can you see the House of Lords rolling over on the immigration bill?
Probably not, no.
I mean,
oh, no, they're definitely not going to do it. They're definitely not going to do it. And one of the issues is that Rishi's getting himself into the position of the old phrase of being in office but not in power. I mean, people want boldness. Honestly, the other side are always going to hate you for it, so you might as well give them something to really dislike you. The idea that you can kind of juggle your way through it, it's simply not going to work. In the same way as they only announce 0.25% tomorrow, right, when actually we all know that should really be 0.5%, because they're going to have another 0.25% in about another month or 6 weeks after that, when our inflation hasn't moved down.
Well,
but we're going back to the legislation. They originally said, Sunak said, that it would take until 2026, and it was only as part of leadership that suddenly got rolled down to 2023. So they knew they'd bitten off more than they could chew with that promise.
Well, there we go. Biting off more than one can chew, but thank you to my panel. They'll be back with us shortly. Remember, I want to hear your thoughts. mailmog@gbnews.uk. Coming up next, following the Archbishop of Canterbury's swift rebuke of the government's Rwanda policy in the House of Lords today, I'll be discussing the thorny relationship between the church and state. And with the impending return of the 100% mortgage model, do young people finally have a chance of hopping on the housing ladder? Or is it eerily reminiscent of events preceding the 2008 financial crash? Hold on for that.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Philip, I voted to leave the EU, giving us in the UK the freedom from the many EU regulations and laws that have been imposed upon us by the unelected officials in Brussels. The government has now taken a U-turn on its promise to scrap these laws. I've now resigned from the Tory party. I'm sorry to hear that. I wouldn't encourage people to do that. Jill says, thank you, Jacob, for telling the British people the truth, as the government are not scrapping EU laws as promised. And Urbin says, Mr Sunak's broken promise has destroyed totally trust in politicians. The only one I trust, having said that, is you. Well, thank you, Urbin, that's kind. The people of Somerset are very lucky. Well, they are for many reasons, not particularly me, but that's very kind. Now, to keep you on your toes, we've switched round because we're going to talk about the return of 100% mortgage models rather than the Archbishop of Canterbury. We'll come back to the Archbishop of Canterbury, I hope, later. With the Building Society, Skipton, launching the track record scheme aimed at getting the feet of renters firmly on the housing ladder. The scheme aims to allow potential house buyers to borrow 100% of a property's value over 5 years if they have impeccable short-term credit records and have undertaken strict affordability checks. Some may say it could be the year 2008 repeating itself. Reports say that first-time buyers' home ownership hopes could be put on a springboard by a new partnership between subscription services such as Netflix and Spotify and Leeds Building Society and credit information company Experian to contribute to credit scores, so that if you've paid off other bills on a regular basis, mortgage companies will have an idea that you're likely to be reliable, and this will help budding buyers acquire their dream of a mortgage and home ownership. So what does this mean for first-time buyers, and can it really be as good as it purports to be? Well, I'm delighted to have with me the director of Priced Out, a group that's passionate about getting young people on the housing ladder, Freddie Poser. Thank you so much, Freddie, for coming in. Do you think this will help? Is 100% mortgages the answer?
I don't think it's the answer. I think that for some people this might be a suitable financial product, and as with any major financial decision, they should think very carefully before doing it. Is it right for them? But on a policy level, this isn't the response. We simply don't have enough houses. That means those houses are too expensive. So young people who tend to have the least equity, maybe earn less as well, are finding it harder and harder to buy a home. A 0% mortgage is just another way to shuffle around the pennies and the pounds. There simply aren't any more houses.
And ultimately, people then have this very high level of debt, which they will have to service and they will have to pay. And that actually, if we had greater supply, house prices may not be as high as they are.
Absolutely. What we've seen over the last 40 years is a massive increase in the price of houses in relative to the amount people are earning. People are earning, a bit more than they were 40 years ago, but houses have gone up significant multiples in that time, and that's really bad for the whole economy, but especially for young people who are locked out of the housing market.
Well, if you go back to the early 1990s, it's when I was leaving university, house prices fluctuated between about 3 and 6 times earnings. If they were 3 times, it was sensible to buy. If they were 6 times, you were facing a bit of a bubble. In my area of Somerset and in Bath, it's now 9 to 10 times earnings, and in some parts of the country, even higher. Whether you get a 100% mortgage or not, that really isn't affordable, is it?
No, it's not affordable. And the fact is that what we've seen is the germ of the housing crisis was back then. It was 40 years ago even. But that's just added and added pressure as we haven't built enough homes, and now we're reaching breaking point. Priced Out's been talking about this for over a decade, but it's been going back years that we've been seeding this crisis.
And the answer is supply, not demand. The governments have tried lots of things to tweak demand. They've made life more difficult for landlords. They've made life more difficult for foreign buyers. All sorts of funny little things have been done. But actually, it's supply. We need to build more, and we need to bite the bullet of planning reform so that we can build more across the country.
Absolutely. There is no solution that doesn't involve building more homes, and the route to that will have to be some sort of planning reform. And there are different flavours of that, and some are better than others. But in the end, if you're not, as you say, biting the bullet and saying we're going to build more homes and we're going to change how those are permitted, how those are allowed to go ahead, we're not going to do it.
And in terms of your group, what are you suggesting in terms of planning reform? Because obviously this is such a political hot potato that for young people we need planning reform, but for lots of older people, they look at their view and they think, well, I don't want a whole load of houses built there.
I mean, housing has been, as you say, a political hot potato for decades. People really find it, there are real costs to building houses near someone, their view, the disruption, the extra traffic, say. So we need to find solutions that actually potentially compensate people for that in a structured way, but doesn't completely stop the building of new houses. And the current system does that. It stops houses rather than give people the ability to potentially figure out, well, what's that worth to me? How can we make a win-win solution here? And I think there are Labour or Tory ways of doing that, and you could approach it from different angles, but we have to do one of them.
So do you think that there may be some mechanism of compensating local communities if a big development takes place? Now, obviously, if you're building one or two houses, that's very difficult to do. But if it's a major development, there's quite a lot of profit in that that could be used to compensate communities or individuals who were affected.
Absolutely. I think that there are already schemes and tools that try to do this, Section 106 being the classic one, but it's not particularly effective and it doesn't go directly to members of the community, it goes to the council. And I think you can be cleverer with this, but you've just got to remember at its heart, whatever policy you design, there are real costs borne by real people here, but they shouldn't get a veto point. They should just instead be brought along and be become winners as well.
But Section 106 hasn't really worked because local councils often spend money badly and just put in annoying traffic calming schemes with the 106 money. And I always think that if you give cash directly to people, you're much more likely to get their sympathy than if you give it to some bureaucracy that will spend it on the latest favourite scheme of the odd politician.
Yeah, people want to see the money spent well, and that can be in direct transfer or other ways. I think councils can have a way in it. There's a lot of infrastructure, for example, that needs to be built, and in the Levelling Up Bill there are new infrastructure levies that might improve that. But in the end, we need to get these houses built.
But I agree with you. There is one difficulty. You have 100% mortgages today. You build new houses tomorrow, as we would both like. Prices therefore fall. And therefore, these poor people who've taken out 100% mortgages are in negative equity. How do we get round that problem? Isn't that a powerful force that has been delaying planning reform?
It is a powerful force. People don't like to see the value of their home, or at least the paper value of their home, go down. I would caution that, obviously, if you own a home that's doubled in price, you're richer in a way, you could get some money out of that, but you can't afford a better home. That doesn't buy you a bigger home. But with the negative equity point, perhaps pessimism on my side, but optimism for, soothing for the people who've done that. This is a long-term process. We're not about to unleash, unfortunately, a wave of building to the extent that we'd see a crash. What we're really talking about is if we stabilise prices and then, by building more, unleashed greater economic growth, wages could catch up without ever forcing people into negative equity.
I think Freddie makes a brilliant point that your house may be worth £1 million, but you've still got to live in it. And if you can't move to a bigger house or sell it, it may give you a warm feeling, but it won't do any more. Thank you very much for coming on, Freddie. After the intermission, following His Grace the Archbishop of Canterbury's intervention, on His Majesty's Government's migration agenda today, I'll be examining the relationship between the Church and State. And in the latest on the cost of living crisis, could your energy bills be about to treble? All that after these messages from our sponsors.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends were like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
News channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Derek says, the problem was never 100% mortgages, it was 120 and even 130% mortgages, plus subprime applicants without secure, regular income being given mortgages. Ian says housing, we have a massive housing shortage and rents are soaring, and we certainly don't need more people in the country. This Archbishop just sees an opportunity to hit the headlines. Now, Ian, you're preempting me. We'll have to get you on as a guest to discuss our issues. Avril says, thought this was a good idea for years, helps people to get on the ladder, level of debt should be in line with income or a longer period. The Chinese have really long mortgages and pass it on to family. That's great. I've got 6 children. I could pass all my mortgages on to my children. Thank you for that suggestion, Avril. So, His Grace, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, made a sensational intervention on the government's illegal migration bill from the House of Lords today. We can see it now.
It is a siloed bill, not a whole-of-government bill. It does not draw in conflict management and prevention, which drives migration. It does not draw in climate impacts, which drive migration and conflict. It is isolationist. It is morally unacceptable and politically impractical.
This is not the first time the Archbishop has made his opinions known on political issues in recent times, and it comes just days after the anointing of King Charles I. But it does raise interesting questions about the relationship between the church and state. It's one that you can go back to Archbishop Anselm, actually, who had great rows with William Rufus and was more friendly with Henry I. You can obviously talk about Thomas Becket, who was murdered at the command of Henry II. You can look at St. John Fisher, that great and holy man who was told by Henry VIII, the Pope may make you a cardinal, but you will have to wear your hat upon your shoulders, for you will have no head to put it upon. Archbishop Welby doesn't face that sort of problem, and I will admit that personally I think extraordinarily highly of him. I think he is a good and holy man, even if not necessarily wise to interfere in the very, very political and not necessarily particularly religious aspect of migration policy. Kelvin, the Reverend Kelvin Mackenzie, as we now like to call you, do you think the Archbishop is wise to interfere in this, or is it something that's risky for a clergyman?
Actually, I think it would have been riskier if he hadn't said anything, to be fair. I mean, that's his job. His job is to look after the waifs and strays. What he's chosen to do is extend that across our borders around the world. I think that's a mistake. And I noticed that the Church, and I was listening to a bishop earlier talking about this, haven't got a solution to what is a massive problem for us and a problem that's getting worse. I wouldn't mind if they said we're going to do X or Y, But they don't say that. What they say is Rwanda is out.
But isn't there a difficulty in the clergy getting involved in immediate political issues? Because isn't the job of a bishop to talk about truth, the absolutes of faith, the resurrection and God? Whereas with politics, it's much more shades of grey, that it's opinion that may be wrong.
Well, I think within the Church of England, there's plenty of the dark side and there's plenty of the white side. There's plenty of grey within the church in our country. And I, as I say, I think he's right to do it. But he's part of the debate. What I object to is that surrounding him will be other people who will use him as the figure that says, well, if the Archbishop of Canterbury is against it, then obviously we're on God's side, so therefore we are going to be hostile to this action.
Rachel, do you think it's wise of him to intervene? Do you think it represents Anglican feeling in the country?
I think it was a brave move, because it will alienate some of his sheep. I use sheep as in the biblical sense,
Indeed.
not not in an offensive way. Yeah. But I think he was right to do so, even though it was a risky strategy, because it's about morals and ethics, and sometimes morals and ethics cross politics.
And do you think it's right that the Church has this privileged position in the House of Lords where the Archbishop can make this statement from, that if he were doing it from the pulpit in Canterbury Cathedral, would that be one thing, but actually he's a legislator, but he has no democratic mandate? Is that right in the 21st century?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure that it is, because he hasn't been voted there. Yeah, but he's simply stating his case. But it's a very privileged position.
And he has the platform, so if he's stating the case on the platform he's got, then that's reasonable, even if we might want to discuss whether that platform should exist.
Yes.
But that's the same with the whole of the House of Lords, as nobody's actually voted for them. And
except for the hereditary peers, who get voted for by each other. It's a very distinguished electorate, very high-quality electorate.
Yeah, that's quite right. But so the issue is, if you were a vicar, local vicar, and you had this view from your pulpit, how would your congregation view it? And I suspect that they would lose audience if they were very hostile to this, because you've got probably older white people who are literally in favour of the Rwanda situation, and they don't want to hear their vicar saying this.
I mean, perhaps it's easier for me because I'm a Catholic, and the rubrics require that the priest should preach about the gospel of the day, not give you his latest political opinion, which I find quite reassuring, because I don't want my politics reflected in the pulpit, let alone other people's.
But this is people's lives we're talking about, and that's where it's the moral dilemma. It's not just politics, it's people's individual lives.
You're absolutely right, but this is the dilemma, that actually the risk to people's lives is being trafficked by people traffickers, that they've already got to a safe country, they are being brought here in a very dangerous way. That is a risk to life and limb. Surely the government is right to do what it can to make people safer. And that this is where the Archbishop gets in such trouble, because he is taking a political opinion where there isn't actually a right or wrong answer. All the answers are difficult.
You're right, every single answer is difficult, but at the same time, the stance that the government is taking isn't necessarily the most human.
Well, I know.
But hold on,
can I say I don't agree with that? I think it is very human that we face a massive issue in our country, raised in your earlier piece, about housing in this country, and rents are literally off the dial, rising, they say, by 14%. I would say, where I am in the southeast, I think you could say that could be 30% or 35%. And one of the issues is that we are taking in people from areas which previously we didn't know we had a commitment to, and they are having to be housed. Now, I do understand that, but honestly, there are issues which so I am surprised. So there's a war in Sudan. I am absolutely astonished to discover that that our country, which is already like that, actually has now got to be part of solving this issue. I am not in favour, and I don't think anybody had any idea of what the refugee position would be for Western Europe, as we turn out to be massively attractive because we are, commercial and various other aspects.
But just going back to that point, the government's argument is that a lot of the hotels haven't got staff, restaurants haven't got staff because of the migration back into Europe. So surely there must be a lot of housing available.
No, because we've got double the migration that we had when we were still in the EU. Migration's
migration is 500,000.
So why?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to. I'm so sorry to cut you off. My panel's so good and enthusiastic, they still want to carry on arguing over this. But up next, they'll give their views on reports that our energy bills could be trebling owing to fluctuating demand. Back in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Gwen says, sadly, we decided we felt we could not be part of the Church of England following the COVID-19 pandemic. It has become a political vehicle for climate change and migration policy. Perhaps we should take stock and look at what happened and how the Church was used in the past in Germany. God bless you. Was that the Reformation, when the Church in Germany left Rome? Peter, he should do his job, concentrate on religion. He has not been voted into government, so should be quiet. I think that's a bit harsh. Robert, great show, serious question. I live in the Mendips. When you taking us under your wing? I'm sorry, yesterday I said there'd be sunshine in Somerset. I'm not sure that was entirely accurate as most weather forecasts, but not entirely accurate for today and yesterday in Somerset. Anyway, the energy cloud has made a return over the UK as investment bank Goldman Sachs is warning gas prices could treble by the end of the year across Europe. This comes following an unexpected drop in energy bills over recent months, with forecasters concerned that the lowering cost could lead to an increase in demand. Not surprisingly, I mean, supply and demand depends on price, thus leading to prices going up later. The essentially socialist energy bill also passed its second reading in the House of Commons yesterday evening, after several changes were proposed and approved, including a ban on new coal mines and costly energy efficiency certificates for households and businesses. Parliamentarians didn't even vote on it. It went through unopposed. So what is the solution to these erratic and often gargantuan energy costs? It worries me greatly that the energy bill went through yesterday without a division, with very little opposition, when it's putting a lot of costs on consumers. There's the hydrogen levy, there's the certificates of energy efficiency, there are new regulations for domestic appliances, all of which will add costs. When energy prices are record high, can this make sense?
It's an extraordinary move by the government. And the reason it's extraordinary is because it's estimated that the government is costing the government 13 billion, or in excess of 13 billion, with the current energy cap that every household has, supposedly being withdrawn in June. But the new levy of £165 a household, just that aspect without the certificates, is generating in excess of 3 billion based on 19.2 million households. So why are they saying we're going to give you 13 billion, but by the way, we're going to have another 3 billion back in effectively another stealth tax? It's a bizarre move.
It seems to me this just hasn't thought through. I was actually the energy minister for the brief period of Liz Truss's administration when we introduced the energy price cap. And the reason we did that is that prices had simply become unaffordable.
Yeah.
But the reason they'd become unaffordable was in fact because of government policy, was because we weren't exploring for oil and gas anymore in this country. We weren't using the shale gas resources that we have, and we have about 25% of our electricity prices made up by green levies. So there comes a point at which taxpayers end up forking out for, in a way, their own bills because of imposts put on by the government. And this just seems a crazy way to run energy policy.
It really is. If you're looking at the wider picture, the UK alone is responsible for less than 1% of global warming. So surely a solution would be a much more global position rather than increasing the cost of living crisis by putting on costs on energy bills that Goldman Sachs are saying are going to rocket anyway. But on that point, I phoned my energy supplier today and said, when will I expect a decrease in my costs as the wholesale prices come down? And the response was that the price at the moment is still higher than the cap. So therefore, in the foreseeable future, there will be no reduction whatsoever.
And the cap is a recognition that ultimately governments are responsive to electorates, and electorates cannot afford the green policies that governments wish to impose on them.
I agree. But the answer is not sticking those kinds of caps across the whole of everybody, including people like me. OK, it was a ridiculous policy. Why can't
It's a great policy. I thought it up.
No, it was a bad policy. Those that can afford it should have paid.
You know,
and I can never understand why governments turn around. And I tell you what it is because the civil service are not capable of organising
it wasn't that at all. I'll tell you why it wasn't.
Okay.
It's really straightforward. That at the point at which we were working it out, prices had gone up 8 or 9-fold, and there were remarkably few people who could actually afford an 8 or 9-fold increase in their bills. And that there may be a few very well off, but actually the bureaucratic cost of administering it to take out the super rich would not have been worthwhile.
OK, right, but it stayed high. And as it was going down, I am absolutely hostile to the idea that everybody should receive it. And I'm not even sure I accept the idea that the cost of the administration would have been higher than the money that was handed out, because that's always said about all forms of benefits.
The rise in prices was so extreme last year. That was why it was done on that basis.
I cannot accept that those that can pay don't pay. And even if it came to the point of saying to the wealthy, you make a donation, it doesn't matter. Somebody should pay if they can.
But wouldn't you put it the other way round and say that actually we should have an energy policy that means people can afford to pay their energy bills, and that it's self-harm because we've decided to have net zero by 2050, and therefore we've made our energy system inefficient?
But I was reading today that British Gas are looking to receive in excess of £2 billion profit this year. So something has gone wrong somewhere. That's just one energy company. It doesn't make sense.
I'm in favour. I'm in favour of these companies.
What, of the £2 billion?
I am. I'm absolutely in favour of it. After all, if we're going to start legislating on the basis if you make money, that's a mistake. It's because what happens when you lose money? Is the government then going to subsidise the losses?
But in a cost of living crisis of more taxes on us, surely
they're taking huge chunks out anyway.
But the excess tax on, for example, Harbour Energy has meant that they have stopped investing in the North Sea. They've cut 350 jobs. And the energy they were getting out of the North Sea kept prices down because it increased supply. So taxation reduces supply and increases prices, which makes bigger profits for perhaps our friends in Qatar and our friends in Texas, but doesn't make profits for businesses in the UK. So I think those types of taxes are self-defeating.
Right, and it's a difficult argument to make when people are really hurting. I mean, these are massive, these energy bills. I mean, I don't know, with my Octopus one, they do it stunningly, by the way they tell you. You're absolutely in the cart. They're doing fantastically. But unless we are going to become independent, the reason we voted Brexit, because we thought there was a form of independence. That ship almost appears to have sailed. But the same is true of energy. Why is it that the counter-argument seems to win? No fracking, no North Sea development, no opening coal mines, nothing which will make us independent gets the nod, but anything which increases taxation of either companies or individuals can go through.
And cheap energy has been economically beneficial for centuries. Thank you very much to Kelvin and Rachel. That's all from me. Up next is the great Dan Wootton. What sort of treats are on the menu tonight, Dan?
Good evening, Jacob. Well, look, we're crossing to Scotland, actually, and you'll be very interested to hear from Megan Gallagher, the deputy leader of the Scottish Tories. She is taking the fight to the SNP in deep trouble, so I can't wait to hear from her on that. Plus, have you heard about this film that has been entered into the official competition at Cannes Film Festival, the only British entry? It is called Killing Boris Johnson. It is one of the most despicable things I've seen. Lee Anderson is going to react tonight.
Well, that sounds all very exciting stuff. You take the high road and I'll take the low road, and I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this has been State of the Nation, but the weather's coming, and I have a feeling there may for once be more rain in Somerset.
Good evening and welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie Shuttleworth, from the Met Office. Now, Thursday will see another day of heavy showers and a risk of thunderstorms. Low pressure is very much still in charge of the UK's weather, and that's pushing these frontal systems, bringing more areas of rain to more northern and eastern areas of the country through Wednesday evening and into tomorrow as well. So we'll continue to see that rain across Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland from that front. But showers from the day will start to fade away, though they could linger a little while for the likes of East Anglia and other southeastern areas. But for many, it'll be a dry night and a dry start to Thursday, with some low cloud lingering across the high grounds of parts of the Midlands. Through the rest of Thursday, we'll see some sunshine lasting through central and southern areas of England and across northwestern and southern parts of Scotland.